joining us for this joint event organized by the Middle East Institute and the World Bank Sustainable Development Department of the Middle East and North Africa. My name is Paul Salem. I'm the president of the Middle East Institute. The issues of climate change obviously have become a part and parcel of policymaking, of business planning, of social planning all around the world. This is very much the case in the Middle East and North Africa as well. The Middle East and North Africa is a major player and a major sort of region impacted by this. We are a major oil and gas producer. We have a small portion of emission, but the Middle East and North Africa are greatly impacted by higher temperatures, by changes in precipitation, impacts on agriculture, water security, food security, social stability, and the like. The World Bank has really been a pioneer in delving into this area all around the world, and they've done tremendous work in terms of policy investigation of this issue in the Middle East and North Africa. Of course, they work closely with governments and social sectors and private sectors all over the Middle East and North Africa. And we're really thrilled to be part of their effort and part of their outreach. I myself today am in Houston, Texas, participating in Sarah Week, which is a major energy conference. And it's amazing to see how much in every single conversation among private sector energy companies, sovereign energy institutions, how much climate change is absolutely part and parcel of the thinking of the present and the future of energy. Obviously, we're all also reeling under the impact of the war in Ukraine, obviously the humanitarian crisis, the loss of life, the risk, but the tremendous impact, obviously, it has on energy markets and how that might affect the trajectory of climate change policy. On the one hand, it has maybe forced some governments to scramble in order to keep energy production up, and by some of them going back to coal, at least temporarily. But I would say on the positive side, it has made it sort of clearer to countries both in Europe and elsewhere that moving faster in the energy transition, taking climate change more seriously and putting it more front and center is actually the right way to go, and to become less dependent on hydrocarbons or energy that's transported from one country to another. Anyway, I look forward to a very, very rich session, rich group of sessions today in today's conference. The World Bank has already produced a report that is available, and a number of World Bank and other experts will be delving into the various aspects throughout the day. I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud, who leads Middle East Institute's Climate Change and Water Program, for working with the World Bank and putting this two-day conference together. And I want to thank the World Bank team, particularly Ayat Suleiman, who's not able to be with us live today. Interestingly, she, as well as her colleague Adil Abbas Sayed, who is able to join us, are both in New York at the Security Council, and they'll tell us how climate change is factoring into the Security Council's thinking. But I want to thank Ayat, who is the regional director for the World Bank Sustainable Development Department for the Middle East and North Africa, for all the work she and her team. She presides over 100 staff members and $5.2 billion of investment in these areas in the Middle East and North Africa, real institutional powerhouse in impacting this sector. I want to thank Ayat for all the cooperation she's led. I want to thank Adil for taking the time to be with us today. Adil is the regional coordinator for climate change in that department at the World Bank. So I look forward to a wonderful conference. Thanks for joining us. Ayat Suleiman has recorded a brief video with opening remarks. So let's turn to that video before proceeding with other parts of the conference. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. It is my pleasure, together with Paul Salem and the colleagues of the Middle East Institute, to welcome you all today for this important dialogue series, where experts from the region and the World Bank will share their experiences and reflect on concrete ways to scale up climate action and green recovery in the Middle East and North Africa, aligned with our climate roadmap that we have developed for the region over the past year. By now, we are all aware of how our region is particularly vulnerable to climate change. The lives and livelihoods are already suffering from its impacts, from extreme hot temperatures, increased water scarcity, coastal erosion, often in very fragile contexts. The IPCC recently released the second part of its sixth assessment report, entitled Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability, which reminds us that the world must take bold action, and in fact take bold action in the next decade, or 9 years to be more precise, to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees to avoid irreversible damage, mounting loss of human life, biodiversity, and investments. Projections in the region are dire. In a 4-degree world, extreme high temperatures of up to 56 degrees could become the norm. Mediterranean coasts could receive up to 50% less rainfall, and the Maghreb region could experience a 0.6 meters sea level rise by 2080, with devastating consequences to the urban communities living in those regions, coastal regions. According to our analysis, climate change will push up to 132 million people into poverty over the next 10 years, undoing hard-won development gains. Disasters are already pushing 26 million per year into poverty every year, and they are expected to increase over the next 2 decades. But these challenges could also be turned into opportunities. And that is what I would hope you will be able to discuss, we will be able to discuss in this important event. From new jobs, green jobs, new market opportunities, and new different shapes of our landscapes and our cities, that is the future that could be the one for MENA if a new development path is embraced. Let me share with you a few of the examples of what that greener future for MENA could look like. The population of MENA is expected to double by 2050. 300 million new jobs will be needed to address the rising young population requiring or entering the job market. According to a recent New Climate Economy report, bold climate action could generate 65 million new low-carbon jobs globally by 2030 and could deliver economic benefits in the order of $26 trillion in the same time frame. MENA can have the opportunity to seize some of those opportunities. Let's take a look at renewable energy, not including hydropower. It is at the moment responsible for less than 1.5% of all electricity generation in the region versus 10% global average. With the very high potential for renewable energy generation in MENA, MENA can decarbonize its energy systems with significant socioeconomic and environmental benefits. In Morocco alone, the cumulative net job creation in the next 30 years could result in nearly 1 million new jobs. IFC, our private sector arm, has issued a new report called Green Reboot, where it found that concerted action by public and private sector players in 10 key sectors between 2020 and 2030 can deliver $10 trillion in investment opportunities, create 213 million new jobs, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 4 billion tons equivalent across the markets. In Egypt, Jordan, and Morocco, this translates into 0.2 trillion in investment opportunity, 4.2 million new direct jobs, and a reduction of 111 million tons of CO2. Let's look at cities. MENA cities can have a significant role to play, as their physical and economic density can drive technological change, infrastructure investments, but also resilience to shocks that support innovative green growth solutions. If cities in 21 emerging markets prioritize climate-smart growth, they stand to gain a large amount, up to 7 trillion in investments, and could create 144 million new jobs. In the agriculture sector, very important for the MENA region, water scarcity is a key concern. But for example, our study in Jordan has shown that a switch from growing vegetables using hydroponic technology could improve yields by 6 times and use 3 times less water. Wastewater management is another area with potential for improvement. Today, about 80% of wastewater is not recycled in the region, compared to just 30% in high-income countries. presenting a major threat to human and environmental health, but offering a massive opportunity to satisfy public demand for water. Green is only one dimension of the type of growth needed for the future in this region. It should also be inclusive and resilient. At the World Bank, we are embracing this green, resilient, and inclusive development approach to recovering from the pandemic, but also to ensuring a better, broader, long-term future for the world. The quantity of growth is not going to be enough. A focus on the quality of this growth is needed for transformation. For example, stakeholders in the financial system are now widely convinced that not considering climate and other environmental dimensions is just too short-sighted and will become too risky. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero was launched at COP26 and represents a signal to more institutional investors that are looking for opportunities to support greener and more equitable investments.
Thank you, Ayat. I know that the video cut a bit short. That was a technical problem that we found out just a few moments ago. But as you can tell from Ayat's quick overview of some of the main findings, the work and the reports that the World Bank is putting out are very detail-oriented, very comprehensive, and very much worth reading. So I absolutely urge everybody to download them. And to really digest them, as it were. Let me turn now to my colleague, Dr. Mohammed Mahmoud, who runs the Middle East Institute's Climate and Water Program and who helped put this program together to walk us through the conference, at least for today and what might be coming today and tomorrow. Mohammed, thanks for all your efforts, and over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Ayat, for submitting those comments. Both of you have set the stage for us in terms of the context. So I'm happy to dive a little bit deeper on the nuance of our conference or event over the next couple of days. So just a recap, as Paul mentioned, my name is Mohammed Mahmoud. I'm the director of the Climate and Water Program at the Middle East Institute, a relatively new program. And this event couldn't come at a more perfect timing, not in context just to our program, but in context of the comments that were shared by both Paul and Ayat, that the MENA region is at a very critical juncture as it relates to climate change impacts and the potential of solutions to counteract those impacts. The event over the next couple of days, we're going to be focusing on 4 unique panels that explore a particular aspect of a transformation area from the roadmap document that was mentioned. First, today we'll have a couple of panels, the first of which is going to be on climate smart approaches to natural resource management, and that will start shortly after this particular session. And then we'll end today's group of sessions with strategic and optimal approaches for green investments. That's going to be our second panel. Tomorrow morning, we will start with our third panel, which is achieving economic growth through energy and transport decarbonization. And then our final panel tomorrow will be on enhancing climate resilience in urban environments. And then we will have a few concluding remarks and next steps based on the discussion of these 2 days, as well as the outlook of the roadmap to the Middle East and North Africa document. And on that note, let us transition to our first speaking session, which is on this particular document and content. And to do that, I'd love to introduce Mr. Adil Sayed Abbas, who is the Regional Coordinator of Climate Change in the World Bank. And he will share with us key messages from the roadmap for climate action in Middle East and North Africa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. And also let me take this opportunity to thank Paul Salim and the whole MEI team and the World Bank team, consisting of Frederic Dupont and Selena Pentama, who has put this session together. It is my pleasure to join your distinguished audience and guests to share some messages on World Bank's approach to tackling climate change in MENA region. This is a roadmap that guides our operations and programs for the next 4 to 5 years until 2025. And this would hopefully help us kickstart today's discussion that I really look forward to on technical aspects of some of the transitions that the MENA countries need to make on dealing with climate change. If you could move next, Mohammed, thank you. I apologize, I'm at the UN building and I am just outside the UN Security Council's room, so apologize for any background noise. I would just walk all of us through to some of the key messages that come out of the climate change roadmap in the MENA region. The important thing to note is that at the bank, we have a corporate level World Bank Group Climate Change Action Plan. And then for each region, we worked with country clients to look at specific ways that our programs and support can help the country's transition to low carbon economies and build resilience of the communities. I will give a few more messages. You have heard from Paul and Ayat on the impacts in this region, and this audience is not new to the impacts of climate change in the region, and then also flag some of the opportunities for action. And I would spend very little time on it because I really would like to move to some of the key areas that the action needs to happen in the next few years for us to tackle climate change. So if you could move next, Mohammed. And before I go to the impacts and opportunities of climate change, one big message that I would want to deliver to the audience today is that, yes, there are international commitments on climate change. And yes, as a global community, collectively, we need to take these actions seriously. But one of the primary reasons World Bank and our regional action plan is designed in a way is that we are seeing the impacts of climate change on the economic and social well-being of people and countries in the region. And therefore, it is pertinent for the interest of the countries in a long term to look at these risks and these impacts and then address these issues at a systematic level. The next, please. As you've heard from Paul and Ayat, this region is not new to the impacts of climate change. If I could just read some of the headlines, if the word global temperature rises by 3 to 4 degrees Celsius in many countries in MENA, we could have temperatures as high as 56 degrees Celsius. And those are inhabitable conditions. You see the chart below, which projects this trajectory if the global action is not taken. Similarly, there will be significant changes in the precipitation and the patterns of rain and floods, which could mean long-term droughts in many countries affecting agricultural production, and then also significant sea level rise changes that would make the coastal communities much more vulnerable to climate change. Next, please. And as I was saying earlier, there are many more risks that climate change brings to countries. And MENA is such a diverse region, from a high dependence on fossil fuels on one end for a group of countries to acute vulnerability to climate change, physical risks on the other end. The risks are multiple. And this slide just shows that how those risks are from all of those multiple directions compound and have significant potential impacts on economic well-being and the social well-being and lives of people living in this region. This region is not new to water scarcity, and at the rate that the natural resources are being depleted, could have significant consequences in future. Next, please. And I don't need to spend too much time on this. The bottom line is that despite all of the progress that we have made in the region for its energy consumption still largely more than 90, 97, 98% on fossil fuels. And today's global decarbonization trajectories, this is going to be a major issue that the MENA policymakers and the countries need to address and define green growth and diversification strategies to tackle these impacts. Next. While there are significant risks and impacts of climate change, just to highlight that there are significant opportunities for action as well. MENA is, as many of you are familiar, is endowed with huge resources on solar and also wind. And not just these resources, but if these resources are fostered in a sustainable manner, it could mean a wealth of economic opportunities and jobs and a just transition for communities in MENA. And this is just one example where action on climate change could drive a faster and a greener transition to low carbon and more economic benefits for communities in this region. Next, please. But if these climate change physical and transition risks are not addressed, there would be significant socio-economic implications, as I alluded to earlier. Here are some of those risks. Droughts, for instance, and the food production will get impacted, which would where climate change will serve as a multiplier of food insecurity. It could breed additional tensions and an already fragile country context. A recent report from the bank concluded that globally more than 200 million people could be forced to migrate out of their homes because they may not have enough subsistence in their current areas due to changing climate. And these impacts will be disproportionate on women and poor, and would have significant consequences for public health and other labor conditions. Next, please. Maybe move to next, Mohammed, because I understand many of the participants in the room are very much familiar with the water scarcity issue in the MENA region as one of the biggest drivers for us to take climate change seriously. And then, of course, climate change-driven impacts on food, agriculture, and land degradation. On this slide, you could see that desertification endangers 28% in the Nile Valley and the Horn of Africa, and 16% in North Africa and 9% in Arabian Peninsula. Just to share another example of the scale of impacts that climate change and depletion of natural resources, including land degradation, could have in future in long term. Next, please. At the same time, we know that the population in urban areas is rapidly increasing. There are more and more people who are consuming more energy, owning more cars, and intensifying due to lifestyle choices, the consumption of electricity. Just to point one fact, often in the global debate, we see that many MENA countries are not at a cumulative level very high emitters of emissions. But if you look at the per capita intensity of emissions, many of the MENA countries, in fact, 4 out of the top 10 are actually, of the global list, are actually in MENA. And this trend will only worsen with increasing urbanization and higher energy consumption going forward. Next. So what can we do as a World Bank and then as a regional community and at a country level to deal with some of these impacts without having overbearing impacts on our economic and financial stability of the region? So bank consulted with a number of country clients and civil society and other stakeholders to develop this roadmap and identify 4 key areas where the countries need to transition at a systematic level. Mohammed, if you could move next, I could show. And we put this together as a framework for countries to consider. And this is a framework that the bank in its own operations will follow in the next 4 or 5 years as we help towards or support implementing climate action to countries. The first pillar of this framework is the transition needed in food systems, water security, and natural capital. The second pillar is energy transition and low carbon mobility. The third pillar is understanding the impacts of climate change and managing those risks and impacts, the coastal, and then also in urban future. And the fourth is, for all of this to happen, the countries and the global community need to come together to create a platform for supporting these actions through sustainable finance for climate action. There's a lot that the countries can do, and there's a lot that the global community can do to bring financing, to build resilience, and to support low carbon solutions. While these countries in MENA look at this framework for systematic transitions, what we must not forget is there are significant cross-cutting priorities that would need to be included. Social and spatial inclusion, citizen engagement, moving low carbon transition in a just and equitable manner, understanding the fragility and tensions at a local level, and then look at some of the opportunities where we could crowd in private sector financing to these solutions. We know now that despite all of the global efforts in crowding in climate finance, this is not nearly enough to ensure that these transitions are financed adequately. And then the governments across different institutions, across different ministries need to come together to find these solutions collectively. A fragile and fragmented action at a sectoral level is not the answer. Next. To dive quickly into these 4 transition areas, I will not spend too much of the time, but just to say that from the bank side, we have already identified priority interventions in each of these 4 transition areas that the bank will support in consultation with client countries in all of these 4 transition areas. Next. For instance, on energy transition and low carbon mobility, we have identified these 3 key pathways: promoting long-term emission reduction and economic diversification strategies for many MENA countries, scaling up renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions. This, as I earlier mentioned, is a huge opportunity for many MENA countries where we can take advantage and scale up the renewable energy, not just at a mega project level. There are a number of mega projects that have been implemented in Morocco, in Saudi Arabia recently, in Egypt, but those mega projects are not themselves part of a complete solution. We need to have distributed renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions at all levels of consumption, with government, at all levels of business, and at all levels of household consumption as well. And then we need to significantly transform how the transportation systems are established and fostered going forward, so that we can bring in principles of low carbon mobility at urban level and reduce the use of motorized fossil fuel driven vehicles. Next. And as I was alluding to earlier, climate smart cities is the way to go. We, of course, have significant risks in terms of floods and other physical risks from climate change, but then there are also opportunities for low carbon solutions at city level. Mobility is one of those. Energy efficiency is a major potential option, and there are many more at industrial level as well. Next. And as I was alluding to, crowding in sustainable finance for climate action. And there are three ways we see this needs to happen. The countries themselves need to green their own financial systems. The banking system, the central banks need to consider climate change risks. And then identify and address transition risks. For instance, if Europe, EU, and US is starting to put in tariffs on imports, on carbon-intensive imports from MENA countries, what is the level of economic impact on MENA countries from these transitions? And that's just one example of transition risks. There's also other kinds of transition risk where so many of MENA assets are fossil fuel invested. And those assets could in long term become stranded assets if the transition is not managed and those risks are not mitigated. And then thirdly, and lastly, but more importantly, unlock green financing for climate smart investments. As I said, there are global climate finance options available, but those are not enough. So countries themselves need to look at their expenditures, and we need to think of how we could, for all of these transition solutions, bring in private sector financing for climate solutions. Next. I alluded to these cross-cutting priorities. Of course, we can delve more deeper into it, but the most important point on this slide to mention is that the countries would need whole of government approach, by which I mean that all of the ministries, all of the sectors from finance to productive sectors to agriculture to water would need to come up with these strategies together, because there are significant linkages between sectoral solutions. For instance, you can't address the water scarcity issue in its own without addressing the food security and how water is consumed in food production. Next. Just to highlight, and there are more details that we continue to work with countries on, but we have prioritized for many countries in MENA these priority interventions and how these will be implemented over the next few years, working very closely with how our client countries would like these solutions to be supported from World Bank and other partners as well. And I won't go into specific country programs at this point, but there are lots of additional details that you could see if you download this report. Next. Having said all of that, the bank and the MENA countries themselves are not starting from scratch. Next, Mohammed. There are a number of examples where bank has supported with these large transformation programs in different sectors, in energy, in urban areas, in natural resources, and in transport and low carbon mobility. There are many more programs that the bank and the countries themselves have built up and have initiatives to drive forward. So this roadmap from World Bank comes at a point where the country clients and the country participants realize that these are the actions that they need to prioritize and scale up, and World Bank will provide that support and continue to provide that support. Just to point out, in the last 4 years, the bank has invested around $6.4 billion as part of these programs in MENA countries. And we continue to increase this ambition going forward. On the next slide, please. As part of this roadmap, these are the key 4 commitments that the bank, World Bank Group in itself, which includes World Bank, IFC, and MEGA, commits to making, which is to invest around $10 billion of World Bank and IFC financing in these climate smart projects in different MENA countries. We have also committed to ensure that at least 50% of this climate financing addresses and builds resilience and goes towards resilience building solutions and projects. We have also ramped up our analytical work to understand these options at a country level and introduce a new country diagnostic called Country Climate and Development Reports in MENA. Over the next 5 years, we will develop this report for all the MENA countries in the World Bank portfolio. In FY22 already, we are producing these reports for Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, and Iraq, and we will follow this trend for all of the other countries over the next 4 years. And then the bank also commits to aligning all of World Bank's financing flows with the goals and objectives and aspirations of Paris Agreement. So these are the 4 major commitments collectively by all of the World Bank Group entities in MENA region over the next 5 years as part of this roadmap. Next, and the last, in the end, just to reinforce the message that it is important to look at climate change not just as a climate change issue, but as a core part of a development issue, and how climate change is undermining potential development for MENA countries. And deliver these solutions at a scale. It is a time to work together to collectively implement these solutions, and we look forward to building partnerships with external institutions. Today's session, working closely with Middle East Institute, is an example of how we would, on knowledge, on technical assistance, and on financing, look forward to working with all of the partners in MENA region and globally towards these transformations as part of this roadmap for climate action from the World Bank. Let me conclude my key messages here. Mohammed, thank you very much again, and I look forward to joining this technical discussions in each of these transition areas. Thank you very much.